of neural linguistic programming, because this was all about the communication, not just a communication, but how people were communicating and how they were making change. Incidentally, on a slightly different track here, John Grinder, who's still going, and he's in his 80s now, and he's still teaching neuro-linguistic programming. He doesn't talk about practitioners of NLP or master practitioners or anything else. He simply lumps everybody together as agents of change. And that really sums up neuro-linguistic programming. It contains a lot of techniques that help people to change. And change is what is required. And that's why NLP and psychotherapy are like bed partners. They go together amazingly well. To learn NLP and to call yourself a psychotherapist or a psychologist is a little bit dangerous, because there are aspects of the psych that are well outside of the remit of NLP or hypnosis or counseling or any of the other names that spring up all over the place for people that are purporting to help people with psychological problems. Now, one of the main tenets of the approach of neuro-linguistic programming is a very good way of approaching psychotherapy. You see, NLP doesn't really worry too much about what went wrong and what happened in the past and why you're feeling as bad as you're feeling now. NLP is more interested in how would you like to feel? If you're going to deal with somebody who's a bit depressed or a bit anxious or any of the other labels you want to put on people, they don't want to be depressed as a rule, and they don't want to be anxious. They want to be calm. They want to be relaxed. They want to enjoy life. And so what NLP would do immediately is say, well, what has to happen for you to be relaxed and enjoy life? What happened in the past when you were relaxed and enjoyed life? And how is that different from what it is now? And how can we make that the same in the future? So another way of explaining NLP is that it is very outcome orientated. We're interested in our clients, patients, call it what you like. We're interested in what they would like their outcome to be. Now, if you think about this, any individual's outcome is in the hands of that individual. I can't come to an individual who's depressed and say, hey, I got a bucket full of antidepressant thoughts here. Let me throw you over them and you'll be all right. It doesn't work like that. It has to change from the individual. Thus, the agents of change, which comes up from John Grinder's idea. I see it's coming up on my screen here that there's only 9 minutes left in the meeting. So please let me know when you want me to stop talking, because I'll talk for another 90 minutes. There's no problem with that.
I think there's some issue there. So probably once it gets disconnected, we'll all log in again on the same link.
Okay, we can try that.
Yeah, we are supposed to have 40 minutes, but some issue is.
Yeah, well, I think what happened is a lot of people logged in early.
Okay.
And that's why it's now going. But we'll just keep going.
Yeah, and just in case it disconnects, we will log in again at the same link.
Okay.
Right. Continue,
okay.
Please.
All right. So now we're looking at in the property business, they often call something the marriage value, the value of a piece of land, and then you put a property on that piece of land, and that marriage value makes the whole thing much more valuable. So we talk about the marriage value of psychotherapy and neuro-linguistic programming. Now, when you combine those two things together, you have a much more powerful thing than the sum of its parts. So a therapist or psychiatrist, psychologist, or whatever, anybody in that profession that then brings in the tools of neuro-linguistic programming to help them, they find they become much, much more powerful. Because some of the basic tools of neuro-linguistic programming are things like rapport building, which means how to make a better connection with people more than just a glancing look at them, and tools to help you put yourself into a good state. Now, state, in simple terms, is the way you feel. And the way you feel is up to you. You can make a decision to feel miserable, or you can make a decision to feel happy. Now, what most people do is that they tend to put their thinking on the past and then realize, oh, that was terrible, therefore the current time is terrible, therefore the future is terrible. And this, in my way of talking, is what I call incorrect thinking. Now, I like to look at all psychological problems, psychiatric problems. Now, I'm not talking about organic psychiatric problems where there is a physical organic problem with the head. That's a totally separate entity. But all the other types of problems, I don't look at them as psychiatric problems or psychological problems, because here, especially in India, there's a lot of bad publicity going with all of that. And if you say you've seen a psychiatrist, everybody thinks you're mad and you stay away. You don't come near me, you know, you're bad. So what I do is I say quite simply that all you have is a thinking disorder. You're not thinking in the correct way that would give you the outcome that you want. So if I can now add some tools that help you think in a way to give you the right outcome, then we're going to solve most of the problems. So one of the first things that you learn in NLP, and the first things you would do in a session, and I do it also in a psychotherapy session, is what we call outcome or goal setting. What is it you want? Now, if you know what you want, you're halfway there. Now, there will be some people, probably people in deep depression, or if they have some physical problem as well, will just say, I don't know what I want, you know. And that's a more difficult case to start. But if you get in with good rapport and you really get to understand them and know them, you can eventually get from them what it is they want. If they say they don't know what they want, then you can simply say, well, do you want to carry on as you are? Because it doesn't matter. And normally they would say, no, I don't want to carry on as you are. So therefore, you want change. You want to do something different. Then what NLP does is it uses a lot of tools to make sure that the outcome you want is achievable. It's not, you know, it's like if you are poor, no education, and living on the street, you're not going to have an outcome of living in a palace and having, you know, a string of qualifications and making millions and millions of dollars. Not tomorrow, anyway. So that would not be a proper outcome. That would be, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having that sort of thought, but that would be a dream. That would be something for the future. What we want now is something you can do right now. What can we do? And we call this, as I said, goal setting or outcome setting. And there are lots of little tools to help you make sure that the person is making the right goals and outcomes and making the right stride, you might say, of steps. So they're not running before they can crawl, because sometimes you do need to crawl a little bit before you can walk, and then you can run and so on. And so there's a whole way of changing the thinking of the client. Now that's very powerful in psychotherapy. In fact, NLP is the closest, shall we say, other recognized therapy to NLP is what's known as cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. And cognitive behavioral therapy is quite popular in the UK. I don't know it's quite so popular here, but that is very close. In fact, in the UK, where you have the national health system, cognitive behavioral therapy sessions are available on the national health. But there isn't enough cognitive behavioral therapy trained people in the UK. So the national health will now allow NLP psychotherapy trained people to do those sessions as well, because there is a whole training that you can do after you've had NLP. You can then go into what's called NLP psychotherapy, which is basically bringing the psychotherapy bits, which is also the diagnostic and the understanding of how the brain works and so on, into with your NLP. And it's quite a internationally known qualification now. It's called NLP-TCA, NLP Psychotherapy Association. So I'm anxious that the time is running rapidly out here, 2 minutes, 30 seconds. So as we said at the beginning, NLP and psychotherapy of all forms, whether it be art therapy or psychoanalytical therapy or psychiatric therapy, it fits together lovely. And the reason why it fits together lovely is because NLP has the science of good quality communication behind it. The linguistic part of NLP is not just listening to what somebody says, but really understanding what they actually mean when they're saying it. Because no matter what words you use, it's quite hard to get the picture in your head vocalized out into the speak. So we have various techniques in NLP that checks that we understand what the person says, especially the linguistic part of NLP, so that we can fully be in the client's world. And we do that in psychotherapy. You know, when you're working in psychotherapy with somebody, you sort of park you over here, so you are a neutral person to help the person understand their problems. We're not there as a psychotherapist. You're not there to tell the person what to do, or you're doing this wrong or whatever. We're there to help the person cognite on his or her own problem and also find their own solution.
David, we have 1 minute left. I request everyone to please log out and join again on the same link.
Okay, we can do that.
Right. Okay, thank you everybody. I'll end the meeting now, and I request you to join again on the same link. Thank you.
Okay. I think you'll have to wait for the minute to go before the link dies. Otherwise,
I think if no, I think we can do that.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Whereas the reality is that the patient or the client has both the jug and the cup inside of them, and the therapist just acts as a catalyst to help the patient pour out their own cup of knowledge, and then they give it to them, and then they charge them for it. So that's the sort of the way that most psychotherapy works. And the other couple of sort of golden rules I always go by is this, is that one is that if you have a problem, then you also have the solution. You can't have a problem without a solution. You can't have a solution without a problem. So if somebody comes to you with a problem, you just act as a catalyst to get the solution out of them, and then you hand it back to them on a silver platter. Here is your solution. And they think that's fantastic. And the last bit here is that if you have a problem with another person, and a lot of people do, they have problems with members of the family, they have problems with bosses at work and everybody else. If you have a problem with another person, then the problem is always you. Now think about the logic of that. If you're not there, where's the problem? So you are part of the problem. And you cannot change another person unless they ask for help in changing. But the person you can change all the time is you. So if you have a problem with another person, if you change, the problem goes away and the other person changes. So it's really quite as simple as that. Now, I've just, if you like, addressed some of these questions. Can we use psychotherapy for disease? Well, that's a rather complicated question, and it has a lot of answers. You see, it could be said, and I'm going to be a little bit off on the limb here, but it could be said that as much as 90% of all illnesses or diseases are psychosomatic in origin. Now, I don't mean, you know, people don't fully understand a psychosomatic illness is a real illness. You have real symptoms. A classic example of this is allergies. We now know that nearly all allergies are psychosomatic. But, you know, when you've got somebody in hives all over their body and spots everywhere, and you say it's only in your mind, they'll think you're crazy, because the actual effect is real. The body reacts as if there is some poison or something in the body. So what would be more better to say with that question, can psychotherapy cure disease, is not that it can cure disease, but it will certainly aid recovery very fast. If you have a sound body and a sound mind, you're less likely to get disease. You know, they did many years ago, a little bit topical now, but many years ago, I remember some research done on what was called the common cold. Now, the common cold, believe it or not, is a coronavirus, and they all come in different types. And so they got a particular coronavirus that very few people had actually caught before, and they threw it in a room of people. That's the easiest way to explain it. Not everybody got that disease. Only a small quantity of those people got the disease. And the people that got the disease were the people that were, shall we say, psychologically run down. You know, stress is a classic psychological problem. And if you're stressed, you're going to be open to all sorts of diseases. So it's not that psychotherapy can cure diseases, but psychotherapy can certainly be a great aid to helping the disease. How NLP can help special need children? Yes, tremendously so. In one time of my life, I was living in Lithuania with that current wife at the time, who was an MP in Lithuania, and she ran a charity. Now, I'm going to use old-fashioned language, so I'm sorry if any of you are very up-to-date with the modern terminology, but she ran a workplace for mentally handicapped people, severely mentally handicapped people. And this was just after Lithuania got away from Russia. And now these people were generally brain damaged, i.e. accidents at birth, most common one being the umbilical cord goes around the neck, cuts the oxygen to the brain doesn't develop. And there was one person there who was a physical body of a 23-year-old man, but the brain of a 6-month-old baby. And all he used to do was sit down in a chair by the wall. He used to go, all day long. That's all he ever did. Just that. So one day I sat down beside him and I started doing the same thing. I go, exactly what he was doing, what we call in Nlp matching and mirroring. And then suddenly, the first time in many, many years, he did something different. Instead of going, he went, or something like that, right? And this was a form of communication that nobody had noticed before. So you see, when you're dealing with people with special needs, as it's now nicely put, they have a different world to what we have. And you can't help them by sitting in your world, your ivory tower, looking down on them. You have to go into their world. Can NLP help us establish a timeline with slow learners? I'm talking about IQ of 60 for a 38-year-old. Well, that's another difficult question, because if you've got a full adult with a working IQ of 60, which I think in the old days we would used to call that feeble-minded, and I think below 60 was idiot, and below that was moron. They were the old terms we used to have for people with lower IQs. Is where the word came from. At that age, I don't think you're going to change the IQ very much, but there are a lot of things that people with a 60 IQ would enjoy doing. And I think that's what you need to do. You need to forget the physical age and deal with the mental age. And if that 30-year-old, 38-year-old wants to play on the ground with dirt and build sandcastles out of dirt and throw things, you know, that's what that person enjoys to do. So that's what you can start with. Now, whether you can raise people's IQ is a very debatable question. I think you can, personally, but you're never going to win the argument. It's the great nature and nurture argument. You're never going to win it because if you increase somebody's IQ, the nature people will say, oh, they were only underperforming. So it's not an argument you can win. But certainly with careful help, you could increase and at least make that person feel certainly better. And it takes patience and time, and don't expect, you know, there's an old English expression that says you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, but you can make a very good sow purse, if you see what I mean. So how can we use NLP for different stages of cognitive development of Jean Piaget? Well, now you're getting into, Cyril, nice question, getting into some very technical questions there. You can use NLP in the different stages of cognitive development, but Jules, Jean Piaget is a little bit old-fashioned now in the idea of the educational setup, and a lot of these ideas have changed. Modern thinking is quite different to what it was before. But always remember that your starting point is always going to be in your client's model of the world, not necessarily your model of the world. If a person's having problems in auditory, visual, and also kinesthetic, can we still apply? Well, if they were blind, deaf, and can't touch anything, then I don't know what happened. I don't think they would be alive. I think what you mean is somebody is not as good with auditory or visual and kinesthetic. Yes, you can still apply. It's not just somebody's bit of background noise there, AJ. Okay. What we teach in NLP is to help you bring up your auditory, bring up your kinesthetic, bring up your visual, if necessary. Now, when you say if a person has trouble, does that mean physical problems? You know, they can't hear and they can't see, or is it just a thought problem? And if it's just a thought problem, you know, everybody visualizes regardless of whether they say they can or they can't, because if you couldn't visualize, you wouldn't know which was your car or which was your front door if you haven't got a picture of it inside your head. So I hope that helps you there. Can we use NLP in combination with REBT and CBT? Yes, you can. They're very, very similar. I've already mentioned cognitive behavior therapy, and REBT is another variation of that. And they all, you know, NLP helps with anything, whatever your intervention is going to be. You don't do an intervention. First, you have to make some contact with your client and your patient. And NLP's rapport building skills and your observational skills, because, you know, as a practitioner of NLP, like you talked previously about the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, we encourage you and help you train your own visual, auditory, and kinesthetic skills so that you start to listen to things, see things, feel things, and notice things that other people don't notice. Most of the time, it's just being aware and just being present. I see a lot of therapists that don't even know how to be present with a client. We always, when we're doing psychotherapy and hypnosis training, we have an exercise that's just being there with somebody. Just spend some time being there with nothing added. And it's not as easy as you think, you know, to spend 10 minutes just being with somebody, saying nothing, doing nothing, just being there for them is a very good part of your listening skills. I had some questions, Anil, thanks for asking. Good, thank you, sir. I think thought problems is the right answer. Yeah, I think, you know, if the mechanism is intact, if your brain is intact, if you've got no growths in your brain and you've got no other problems there, then it can only be the way you think. It can only be the way you put two and two together. Can NLP tools used as effectively in language other than English? Yes, of course you can. And in fact, you can ask even, I think, CJ Vargas, I think he teaches NLP in other languages sometimes. I think, unfortunately, you have to learn it in English first, and then you can translate it across. Some of the terminology that we use in NLP doesn't have a direct translation in other languages. But there are a lot of our trainers, and Ramlingham as well, I see here, a lot of our trainers who actually do teach NLP in other languages. So don't worry about that. That's good. How to deal with anxiety or overthinking as someone doesn't call or message who generally does daily. How to deal with anxiety or overthinking is someone doesn't call. Well, there seems to be two questions in one there. Anxiety can only be fear of something in the future. You can't have anxiety about the past. You can't have anxiety about the now. And really, you know, there's a great book, and he's still around, a guy called Eckhart Tolle, who wrote the book Living in the Now. Teaching people to live in the now is a great cure for both anxiety and for depression. In fact, they're using meditation, modern styles of meditation that helps both those types of people. So yes, you can help with anxiety. And, you know, anxiety is fear of the future. So why not just with NLP techniques, help your client create the future they want, not the future they fear. And fear is one of the biggest problems that we humans have. Okay, 4 new messages. Thank you. All right, that's okay. Some people enjoy to be negative feeling. Yes, but it affects their surroundings and relationships. How do we deal with it? Well, to bring in my great British sarcasm.
David, we have 5 more minutes, so probably we can take 1 or 2 questions more.
Okay, I'm just going through them now. In my great British sarcasm, if someone wants to be negative, let them be negative. But you know, in reality, there's no such thing as positive or negative. It doesn't exist. Everything just is. We, by viewing, listening, looking, seeing, we decide whether something is positive or negative. And once you start to understand that, you can't have a negative. In fact, I was listening to a very eminent quantum physicist, and I won't get too involved in quantum physics, but he was explaining a very similar thing. Now, if you look at the atom, I'm not going to get too technical, right? In the atom, you've got a nucleus and you've got a photon and you've got a neutron that's spinning around it. One of those is called positive and the other is called negative. If you turn the name round and made the other one positive and the other one negative, it would make absolutely no difference to the way the atom works. It's only a label you stuck on it. You put a label of positive or you put a label of negative, it doesn't change it. The thing just is what it is. So when you understand that, it is what it is, and when you also think about living in the now, there you've got in its start of curing almost any problem. For a given situation, how NLP and psychotherapy can be used differently. Well, they can be used differently in a given situation. For example, if you were dealing with somebody's outcome, you might use NLP and a properly developed outcome with say a SMART goal and a smarter goal and that sort of thing. Where in psychotherapy, you might be more interested in what they're coming from. You see, the one thing about psychotherapy, it just does tend to look into the past and find out why something happened the way it is so you can avoid doing it again, whereas NLP tends not to do that. And NLP tends to look at just, well, what do you want to happen? Make your own future. You can make your own future. But if you've got a client that's very into depression or anxiety, they won't understand the ability to making their own future. So you might have to go back into psychotherapy to get them to understand why they're in this sort of situation. And once they understand that, then they can make their own future. So there we are. I think we've answered all the questions and we've come to the end of our allocated time. So if I can thank all of you for your kind attention, and you can get hold of me either through the group or my website or anything else, which I'll put details in.
Thank you, David.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Okay, David. Thank you so much for your useful and informative session. And we are gained information regarding NLP as well as psychotherapy, how it is helped differently, and what is the relationship between these two. And few more questions are there that just like you said, we will put it in the group so that we will get answers in the group itself. And I can thank you, Dr. David, for taking the time to come here and share your experience and knowledge with us, and spending your valuable time with us. Anyway, thanks a lot. I thank every one present here for participating here and showed interest in the first session itself. And we have 9 more sessions remaining. And after completing this series of 10 sessions, we will be again starting another series of sessions. So I congratulate all of you being here, and thank you so much. Have a nice day. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Have a lovely evening.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you.
So what he should do, he should spend on only 10%. But what is he doing? He is